Hello, welcome to another Sessionwire Live. Excited to be speaking with Colin Wiebe, Sessionwire CEO. He always wears his sunglasses at night. We'll see in a second. I want to thank everybody for joining us last week with Robin LeBeau and myself, speaking about the development of Sessionwire and Robin's history with Sessionwire and music technology in general. Without further ado, I'm going to bring... Ross says audio is doubling up. Well, we'll figure where that's coming from. That might be from Colin's end, but we'll figure that out. Without further ado... Oh, that's your microphone gone, though.
I just muted.
Yeah. I can't hear you, though. I need your microphone. I think it's actually the stream doubling back from a speaker somewhere. Can you unmute your talk back in Sessionwire?
There we go.
So I can hear you now, yeah. Perfect. Ross, let us know if we're doubling still. It sounds clean to me. I think we're good. He'll let us know. Welcome, Colin. Great to talk to you.
Am I on?
We're on.
All
You're
right.
visible. The camera looks great. We're just discussing camera specifics and the importance of a good camera when doing a live stream, which we're going to do a video on that at some point. Yeah, Colin, I thought we'd start with your history with Sessionwire. For anybody that doesn't know, Colin is our CEO and runs things on a day-to-day basis and shapes and molds the Sessionwire vision. So I thought we'd start with your background with Sessionwire, if you want to start.
Well, that's a good place to start. And, kudos to you, Brendan, for putting these together. And watched a bit of the Q&A last week with Robin. It was really great, not only for your content that you guys provided, but also a lot of the viewers out there and their questions that are coming in. What I really like is the feedback from you out there, the audience, because as we start to get feedback in not just about features and feature requests, but how you actually create using something like Sessionwire in your day-to-day workflow. And we have all gone through a whole year of having to rejig our lives in one way or another. And I don't have to go into rabbit trails about different ways that we've had to accommodate the situation. But for people that record, for people that make music, for me, my first live gig was last weekend. My first one in a year and a bit. And it's not because I wanted to take a year off. It's just because that's the way the world is at the moment. And so to get back on stage last weekend was such a thrill. I mean, the first night was, a little bit dicey and kind of like, the first time back to the gym. If you haven't been back to the gym for a year, it's like you had to kind of get used to what was going on. The next day was really good. It was just fantastic and had a really great time and sang well, played good, and it was like riding a bike. It was getting back into it. And
Awesome.
So I think after, a lot of us out there, we've had to adjust our lives in one way or another. And I think the beauty of what Sessionwire has brought to our community is the ability to connect. And, when people have been locked down, when people have been shut away, when studios have not been able to get an income stream, when musicians have had trouble keeping the lights on, this is a way for people to connect. So I think we've really had to listen to the people like you out there and kind of pivot and figure out ways to make this the best experience for everyone. So I think, Brendan, you're a perfect example of that, because I saw the video that you did with JR putting the whole drum session together. Maybe you can tell the viewers a little bit about how that came together and how that has really impacted the community.
Absolutely. That the whole experience with JR and his engineer and longtime friend Steve Sykes was...
Now, he's the most recorded drummer in history, right?
In history, yeah. It's, Chaka Khan, Michael Jackson, David Foster, you name it. You've heard him on the radio, probably a few times today if you listen to, any kind of pop music. So that video was the product of building a relationship with Steve Sykes, JR's engineer and friend. And something that we've talked a lot about the last couple of weeks internally is how Sessionwire is a communications tool. And Steve, being a mix engineer and working with many clients, wanted a way to connect with his clients and communicate with them during the mix process. So I connected with Steve on and off for a few weeks and got him set up, and he would call me randomly out of nowhere and show me mixes of things that he's working on with other musicians who are the most recorded musicians on their instrument.
So fantastic. Can you imagine, like, the most recorded drummer in history using a tool that we've been developing over the last year? That we didn't really know would take off like it did because of the whole pandemic thing, but it just happened. We happened to be in the right place at the right time. I like to call that the Elvis factor. And the reason it's called the Elvis factor is, if you didn't know, Elvis, he brought that music from the Deep South, the black blues, rhythm and blues music, to the white audience. He was in the right place at the right time, and it just, the rest is history.
Mm-hmm.
So with Sessionwire, it wasn't developed because there was COVID or a pandemic or anything like that. This was developed for a need back in 2015, when I think you probably talked with Robin about that, being isolated on an island and not being able to communicate and write songs with people in the big city.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, it just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and we're just so thankful for people like JR and Steve Sykes to be able to say, hey, we can take this and we can go one step further. And it's fantastic what you guys did. It's just amazing.
Oh, I appreciate it. I mean, again, just to finish that off, Sessionwire is also about building community. So Steve Sykes tied us into his community, being JR, just because they're in that kind of bubble. And now JR's community is kind of, all coming together around Sessionwire. You can get at JR through Sessionwire if you want drum tracks done on your song. It's just, the webs.
Sign me up.
Yes. Right? You want Jay on your tracks?
That's the beauty of Sessionwire and the community that's growing, is because you can now reach out and not only, get your buddies in your band to start playing on your songs, but you can find people from all over the world, different instrumentation and different, mix versions. I'm looking now at remixing a song that, it's a classic rock kind of song, but I want it to sound newer, and so I'm reaching out to some different kind of producers that is going to give me a different sound. And I think as creative professionals, that's what we do. We were talking a little bit about that before I came on, about the era that we're living in. We have this ability to use our computers and the software and things to actually record album-ready music.
That's right.
When I was growing up, we'd have to save, if we didn't have a record deal, we'd have to save all of our family money and go into a studio, and we had big reel-to-reel 24-inch tape. That was expensive, and a studio was expensive, and an engineer, and bring your band in, and you would record your songs. And I remember my wife, when we were first married, we had 2 little toddlers, and it's like, you're spending what on recording these 10 songs? It's like, that's kind of what I do. It's like, at the time, it felt silly after I got the invoice. It's like, oh man, well, maybe I'll have a hit record with this. But last weekend, when I was over on Vancouver Island with my wife's father, who's like in his 80s, he's got one cassette tape in his truck, and it's mine, and he listens to it, and has been for the last 20 years. And I still get emails from people that, appreciate some of the songs that I recorded back then. And even my family, they can't imagine those songs not being a part of their life.
Right.
So that big investment at the time, which is kind of small now, and everybody that's listening here that has a Mac or a PC and a DAW can record a song in an instant. Back then, it was a real, we had to save up, a lot of money in order to be able to communicate our craft, our songs that were in our heart. And I think this is what Sessionwire brings to the community, is that people that have a song in their heart, people that have this, incredible passion to share, their lyrics or their music or their beats or whatever it is that they do, now there's an opportunity to connect with other like-minded people around the world and sort of fast track that whole process. So it's an exciting time.
Very much so. Speaking of, tracking the songs live off the floor and everything like that, these days it's not as common for that to be, a method of recording. But with software like Sessionwire, now you have access to these incredible musicians in places like Nashville where they still do that type of thing, and you can take your song and have them record it live in the same room and listen to it and watch and give feedback in real time, if you want that type of feel. So it's not...
These drummers have had 30 years experience miking their drums now.
That's right.
Back in those days, it was like, okay, move this over here. And I remember when Bryan Adams was recording at Little Mountain Sound, and Bruce Fairbairn was there, and they using a dryer hose out into the loading bay, to get these big reverb sounds, which now you can just put a plug-in in and get the same sound. So it was experimentation, and it was, pioneering in a way, not like Sun Studios where they were all gathered around one microphone. We just had a conversation with Gary Peterson, the drummer from the Guess Who, and we were talking about the recording of Shakin' All Over. And I don't know if you can remember that song. It was originally written by Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, but the Guess Who heard it on a reel-to-reel tape that somebody had sent them from England, and they said, oh, let's record this song, and they did. And it was at a Winnipeg radio station. They had one mic, and they had to arrange their amps and everything in the room to get the balance. So rather than tweaking faders, you would actually move the gear around the room. And they recorded that live off the floor. And I think Chad Allen, the lead singer, had a bad back and was lying on his back singing that song. So, and it became a huge hit. And the way that it was recorded was just so raw and so pure that it comes through the radio speaker. Every time you hear it, it's just like, wow, what is that? And so there's something to be said about the capturing of the moment. And I think one of the things that Sessionwire brings that I'm so excited about is that you can actually capture that moment.
Right.
In the old days, we used to do a demo on our cassette recorders, and then we would take it into the big studio and try to recreate the demo. And then trying to get that energy or that inspirational time that you were recording that song, it was very, very difficult. It was like, oh, it doesn't sound like the demo. But the demo was like, the hissy cassette tape recording of your rehearsal.
Right.
So, we've got a lot of technology at our fingertips, but we need to preserve that moment of creation, which is so exciting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we were just talking about this before we went live. I often say that I wish that I was born 20 years earlier to have caught some of those moments, I'm not saying that I would have been, playing on those tunes, but playing in sessions where you're trying to capture that in that moment, that it doesn't happen quite as often these days because everybody can do it remotely, piece by piece, through overdubs. But
I think it will, though. I think it'll come back eventually.
I hope so.
And I think people will start to feel, I've always said that there's going to be a hybrid. We don't want to waste time flying around and staying in hotels for doing a part here or a part there. But there's something about, having the band or the core musicians in a room at the same time when you're creating a song. It's so much fun, and there's so much energy, and it's the push and pull, and the whole thing just kind of gels together. And that's like bands break up and one guy leaves and another guy comes in, and it's just like, that doesn't sound like the band anymore. That's because it isn't.
Right.
Everybody has their part to play. So, but with technology now, we have the ability to sort of get over some of the peripheral stuff that wasn't needed in the first place. If we can get the songwriters together in a Sessionwire room and they can create this, then, you can do all the detail afterwards. And there's so many great producers out there, so many good mix engineers. so many talented musicians that whatever you hear and feel that you can create, there's somebody out there that can support you. And I think this is what's going to change the whole industry, I think, as time goes by. So you weren't born too late. You're actually in the right place at the right time. You're the Elvis factor, because now you're going to have the best of both.
Yeah, now that you say it, just today we did a session. We were recording demos and we tracked everything off the floor. Thank goodness. Shout out to Harry Gregg and Scott Franchuk at Riverdale Recorders here in Edmonton. They're very much into recording records like that still. So just wanted to throw that out there. It is coming back. It doesn't feel like it's where it used to. You used to be recording to tape and all of that kind of stuff. There's something about that as well, that pressure of recording to tape. You only have so much, and you can only do so many takes and redos before the tape burns out, where, in Pro Tools these days, you can nitpick for eons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of those things where, you get used to a certain workflow, and then all of a sudden things change. Mm-hmm. And what doesn't change, I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and when we discovered MIDI, when all of a sudden you could connect keyboards together and you could get multi-layer sounds, and we all of a sudden had drum machines, much to your chagrin, but
true.
Many of the drummers went, "Hey, am I going to lose my gig?" No, it was just a different sound. It was a different thing that was happening. Mm-hmm. But when you combined all of those different sounds and the different beats and the different music and the different synthesizers that started to come on, it really changed the face of music. And some of it wasn't great, but some of it was fantastic.
Right.
So every time we have a bit of a change in technology, we have a change because people like you and the people you work with are creative people and individuals. And they will come up with something cool with whatever they have. And I think that's the message that I get out to the people that are creating music out there is forget the technology in a way. Let's, we'd like Sessionwire to be invisible, period. Because we want people to focus on their craft, what their story is. What's your story? What are you trying to tell the world? What's your melody? What are you singing? What are you playing? What are you communicating? And this is what goes without time, as 50s or 60s or 80s or whatever the year may be. It's that message that comes through, that connects with the human being. And I think, we can't lose sight of the real heart of what music and communication is.
Right. Perfect. I think that I'd like to get into your musical background, because we're kind of eking into that kind of territory. You're a keyboard player, played with Randy Bachman for a number of years, but what happened before that? You just showed me some videos of kind of Flock of Seagulls era hairdos and things like that. What was your beginning in music, and what was your journey like through music?
Well, my dad was an opera singer, and so I grew up in a musical household. And I think, at my high school band, I got into the stage band, and because I'd learned piano when I was 6 years old, I wanted to play piano in the jazz band. But there was like 6 other people that wanted to play piano in the jazz band. And so you'd have to sit on the stool and wait 4 songs before you could play, and then go back to the stool so 2 or 3 other people. And the band teacher came up to me and says, "Colin, we don't have a bass player. Do you know how to play bass?" I went, I could learn real quick.
Right.
He says, "Well, think about it, because we really need a bass player." So I went with my dad. He took me downtown, and I got a 1972 jazz Fender jazz bass, beautiful blonde bass, and I happened to buy that brand new. So
do you still have it?
I know who has it.
Dang. Oh man.
But anyways, so I went down and I bought it brand new from Reggie's Guitar Center in Victoria, and I learned I went and took a few lessons, and I started playing the bass. And pretty soon, a year and a half, maybe 2 years later, I won Bassist of the Year at the New Westminster Jazz Festival from all the musicians like in our entire province.
Wow.
And so I was officially a bass player. So I remember going to a party one night, and we were just talking to a bunch of guys like, yeah, I want to start a band, and I want to start a band. And, you know, I met this guy named Dave Reimer, who you might know or not, but Dave plays with Lee Aaron now. He used to play with Barney Bentall in the legendary Hearts.
Okay.
And he also played with the Head Pins for a while. Anyway, Dave and I met. We were both 16 years old, and said, hey, let's start a band. We're both singers, and we ended up going to a buddy's place that was a drummer, and we both pulled out our bass guitars. He goes, oh man, I thought you were a keyboard player. I said, well, yeah, I know how to play keyboards, but I'm actually a bass player. He says, well, we can't have a band with two bass players. I said, yeah, that's kind of weird. So I said, okay, I'll capitulate and I'll play keyboards. So I ended up getting like a Fender Rhodes and a Hammond M3 organ and a Selena strings and an ARP synthesizer and all the stuff that you needed back then.
Wow.
And instantly became a keyboard player. I started to learn songs off the record, and we started to play everything from, you know, Deep Purple and the rest is kind of history. But anyway, Dave and I, we sang well together, and we enjoyed being in the same band. So we started this band in Victoria, and long story short, someone entered one of our songs in the American Song Festival.
Okay.
And next thing you know, we get a call, and it says, hey, you're in like the top 20 of the American Song Festival. It's like huge, like tens of thousands of people all over the world enter this thing. We said, okay, well, that's kind of cool. What does that mean to us? It just means hang on. Anyway, fast forward, we get a call, you're in the top 10. Whoa, that's
Wow.
pretty good. Then we get another call back saying, hey, you guys are going to LA. You're in the top 3. They're going to do a video, and you're up for some serious prizes here. So they flew us down to Los Angeles. We stayed at the Hyatt Riot on Sunset, and we did a video of the song with the same producer that did the Van Halen Jump video. The very same soundstage. So if you see the Jump video, it's the same floor, it's the same kit, same stage, same kind of everything. It's all the same lights.
Wow.
And so we recorded the song there, and pretty soon we found out that we actually won the American Song Festival. We placed first, but long story short, because we were Canadian, there was a few issues there, and we decided, well, we're going to take third place instead of first. And then we get this kind of recording contract, a publishing deal with CBS Songs, and we get all these other perks. So instead of taking first prize, which we actually legitimately won, we backed off and took third. Plus, there was cash involved, and we wanted cash at the time.
No
Swear
doubt.
to God.
Holy.
Anyway, that kind of started our songwriting career, and Dave and I started writing songs.
Okay.
And we would write songs together all the time, and our band was pretty popular at the time. In a world that just bands only did covers, we were doing some original songs, and that's always been something that's strong in my heart, is, you know, creating something that's original and not just doing cover tunes.
Right.
Anyway, that led to me joining a band later that, you know, wanted me to write songs with them and record a record, and they were going to be Canada's next Billboard or next Loverboy. And so anyway, I moved to Winnipeg and joined that band, and that ended up being a long stretch, going across Canada, playing all the bars, playing our originals, getting fired because we played originals, all that kind of stuff. And then my is this getting too long here? Or
This is
good?
This is perfect. This is what give the people what they want. The stories.
So it was really funny because I went on a trip with my mom and dad over to Europe, and my dad's an opera singer, like I said earlier, and he was singing the national anthem. He was the guy that sang for the Vancouver or the Canada-Russia series
Okay.
and stuff over in the hockey games. And he would sing the national anthems because he could sing in Russian and in, English.
Got
And
it.
he was also singing in across in the behind the Iron Curtain, where I wasn't allowed to go. I didn't have papers,
Wow.
so I stayed in this little town, and there was a band there that was called Deliverance, and they had a big hit on the radio called "Leaving L.A." and they sounded kind of like the Bee Gees.
Okay.
And the keyboard player, second lead singer of the band, was Paul Jans. And I ended up being like, I went on tour with them as a roadie. And I
Really?
didn't speak any German, but I could tell people, where to hang a light or how to set up an electric grand piano because I had one myself. And so I was just kind of biding time while my parents were off doing their thing. I was on tour with Deliverance in Europe. And
What a story.
so fast forward back in Vancouver, I get a phone call from Paul Jans. And he said, "I've moved to Canada. I'm recording an album and I need a band." And I said, "Oh." He said, "Do you know anybody?" And so I put together some of the guys I had been playing with, which was Mike Root on drums and Tim McKenzie, who played guitar in the band from Winnipeg that I was telling you about. And pretty soon, and Stephen Drake from The Odds.
Okay.
And Bob Press. He's now a winemaker in California, believe it or not. Anyway, as the story goes, I helped Paul put a band together, and he recorded on A&M Records, which was the same record label that Bryan Adams was on.
Right.
And we made some videos for Much Music and for MTV, and that was my first sort of, glimpse into the big time, being signed by a major label. And Greg Ladani mixed his record, and we recorded in Little Mountain Sound, and we recorded in Studio A while Bon Jovi was recording in Studio B. So the whole summer we spent with the guys from Bon Jovi, and as we were, getting used to hanging around in the studio, Whitesnake came in, and Aerosmith came in, and David Lee Roth, and there was this whole string of whether it was the Payolas or just anybody who recorded at Little Mountain. I lived a couple blocks from there and was there all the time. It was just kind of a place that we used to hang out. So it was a real thrill to be part of that whole environment and be on a record label, so to speak, and then go out on tour. And when Paul wasn't working or touring, to make money, we played the bars, and our band was called the Meteors, and we had a house gig at a Vancouver club called the Roxy, which is pretty famous. And we used to play 3 nights a week there, and the other nights were played by the Dawn Patrol, which became the Odds. And it was a real fun time, and so that the whole Meteors thing turned into this lackadaisical band that would just we played what we wanted. We didn't care what club owners would say, and we ended up getting that house gig at the Roxy, and it was a lot of fun for us. One of the things that happened during that time is we played a backup gig for Bachman Turner Overdrive at 86th Street Music Hall. And we were the most booked band at 86th Street. This is during Expo 86. And Expo 86 had all of these different artists that came in, and they used to love booking our band because we were a 4-piece. We could set up in 15 minutes, play a bunch of songs for people, and we were the best kind of warm-up act a booking agent or an owner could want.
Right.
So we would come in there and we backed up everybody from the Kingsmen that did Louie Louie to the Dixie Chicks and Travis Tritt and Jerry Lee Lewis, and you name it. There was just and anyway, we did Bachman Turner Overdrive, and it was New Year's Eve. And we had finished playing, and Bachman Turner Overdrive went on. They played their set, and after they did Taking Care of Business, "Good night, everybody," and I went backstage to get my stuff. I had my bag backstage and my keyboard in the dressing room, and so I go backstage, and the crowd is chanting, BTO, BT, and they're lighting their lighters. Remember that? Now they use their phones.
Yeah.
But in those days, they actually had Bic lighters, and they would put them on, and they're yelling, encore, encore, and it's New Year's Eve. And Bruce Allen, who is BTO's manager, is backstage, and he says to Randy, he says, you got to go out and play another song. And Randy looks at him and says, we don't have any more songs. He says, well, go out and play American Woman. And Fred Turner, who's the big bass player in BTO with the Harley Davidson voice, he turns around and says to Bruce, he says, I can't sing American Woman. Bruce Allen turns around and looks at me and says, you can sing American Woman. Get out there. Me, it's like, I'm going home. I'm done for the night. He says, no, you're getting out there. Next thing you know, I'm with the original Bachman Turner Overdrive, New Year's Eve, 86th Street Music Hall, and I'm singing American Woman with Randy Bachman and Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Wow.
And it was a thrill for me, and it was just like, wow. This is like, after we went backstage, I said to Randy, I said, hey, thank you so much. Just like I've been a big fan. I love the Guess Who and la, la, la. And by the way, I'm recording my own album. And if you're able to play on it sometime, that would be so cool. He goes, I'll give you my number. So he gave me his phone number. I put it in a little place next to my heart. And I'm like, yes, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And so I went fast forward into the studio, and I'm sitting there with my engineer, and this is probably 2 months later, and I said, I did this gig, and Randy Bachman said that he played on my record. I actually have his phone number. And he said, well, phone him. Let's set up a date and get him to come and play on your record. I said, okay. So I'm getting all, psyched up. So I phone him up, and I say, hey, Randy, this is Colin. Do you remember me? We were at 86th Street Music Hall, and you said that you would play on my record. Oh, yeah, I remember you. I said, yeah, well, I'm recording something, and it would be really cool if you would. And all of a sudden, I hear him cup the phone, and he says, Denise, some guy named Colin wants me to play on his record. Can I go out tonight? And I'm suddenly like, no, we didn't mean tonight, because we meant like we'll book it a week or two in the future, and we'll set it all up and make. And he says, I'll be right over. What's the address? It's like, oh, quick, clean up the ashtrays.
Oh my God.
Literally, the Don Thompson, the engineer we had, he was a chain smoker, and I know Randy didn't like that. So anyway, we cleaned up the studio, and he did. He drove all the way over, and he played on 2 tracks. And this is back when we were using reel-to-reels.
Right.
And he played even a double lead solo on that. That was a great record, actually. I had Jerry Doucette play on it as well, and some other really good players. And but what was funny is after we had done the thing and he'd played his music, I got a phone call the next day, and he goes, Colin, I got a gig, and I don't have a band. Can you help me put a band together? It's like, what is it with these guys phoning me all the time, putting bands together? And I said, well, yeah, I can figure something out. And I said, what's the gig? He says, oh, well, we're playing in Toronto. I said, okay, when is it? He goes, this weekend. I said, what? When are we going to rehearse? And he says, oh, we're not going to rehearse. We're lip syncing so you can learn the song on the plane. Oh, okay. So the next thing you know, I'm with 5 guys that I don't know, and we're sitting on the airplane with our headphones on. This is back when he had the little foam Sony Walkman ones.
Yeah.
And we're learning the song, and he actually rented a drummer in Toronto, and we got there, and we were on what's called the Ralph Ben Murgy show on CBC at the time, and we actually lip-synced to one of Randy's songs from his Any Road album. And that was back in, I think, 1990. So all of a sudden, we were a band. And Randy phoned me a couple of weeks later and says, hey, we actually have a real gig. I said, every year I do Blues for Christmas at the Commodore, because that's where I met my wife, and we always do that, and they want us to do a set. So we ended up showing up at the rehearsal hall, and I set up my keyboard, and we're all ready to go, and Randy walks in, the door is flying open, and he said, where's your guitar? I said, what do you mean? I don't play guitar, I play piano. He goes, thought you play. How can we do BTO songs if you don't play guitar? And I said, BTO has two guitars. I'll play one guitar. You have to play the other. And so the drummer said, oh, I have a guitar. And he passed me, this is Billy Chapman, he passed me this 62 reissue Strat. He said, go learn the songs. There's only 10 songs. Learn them. And I did. And the next thing you know, I'm on, big stages warming up for Cheap Trick and for the Doobie Brothers and whatever. And I'm playing guitar in a rock band. And so that was kind of a thrill. And that started, and I ended up being with them for almost 20 years, for 2 decades.
Wow.
And that's kind of the story of how that got going.
Oh my God. Just talk about being, thrown into the fire. That's...
Well, there's an old saying that says, it's always better to be prepared, and have an opportunity than to have an opportunity and not be prepared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun, and there's a lot of stories that we could share with that, but that's kind of the background.
So yeah, we kind of touched on it last week with Robin. The fact that everybody at Sessionwire is a musician and has kind of a long history playing music. We're not just software developers or trying to push something because we need to develop a piece of software and sell it. We actually are musicians and we all use it, and we're trying to make it the way that musicians want to use it. We're trying to implement features that we ourselves would use, and based on the feedback that the users give us, things that...
And this was an idea that went back. Robin and I worked together at a company called Is Technology.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, the Radar, which was a very high-end random access digital audio recorder. That's the acronym. That's what Radar stood for. And I was the VP of sales and marketing, and Robin was there as well. I forget what his title was at the time, but we always were in these meetings where we were trying to create the next coolest thing. And one of the ideas was this ability to work remotely. Robin did a really good job of architecting the whole concept. And I discovered remote recording when I was asked to do a song for a film. And the producer of the film wanted to hire his son to do the engineering and hire the band and whatnot and put it all together. I had written the song, and we booked a studio for 3 days, very expensive studio, and we set up and spent a whole day getting drum sounds. Don't let me go there.
I miss those days. That's what 20 years earlier, that would have been my
clock's ticking, and we're still working on the snare drum sound. That's what happens. You spend all this time up front working on the drums, and then by the time you want to do the vocals and all the cool stuff, you have no money left, you have no time left.
Right.
But anyway, I ended up getting the tracks after 2 days, and I absolutely was just heartbroken. I couldn't listen to them. It just felt awful. I wouldn't put my name on it.
Really?
And I didn't want to embarrass his son or the musicians that were on it. I didn't know what to do. And I had this friend, and I'll put him out there, Phil Robertson, amazing drummer. And he had the first e-drummer. I think it's e-drummer.com or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
Phil does sessions on the internet, and this is before we had anything like Sessionwire. I just called him up and I said, Phil, I understand you do like some remote things. I got a tune here. Here's my vocal and piano, and if you could just put some drums on it, that just can you do that? And he said, oh yeah, man, I'll do that. And he did. He played a couple passes, and I got it back, and I was suddenly re-inspired. It was like, yes, that's the feel I'm looking for. And so I got the bass player in my band at the time. I phoned him up and said, hey, can you play a track and then email it back to me, or Dropbox, whatever you can do?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, I got my stuff all set up. I'll do the Pro Tools thing and record you a bass track to fill his drums. And he did. And it suddenly dawned on me at that time, it's like, wow, this is a new world. We can get stuff recorded remotely, and I can produce this stuff, like I can hear it in my head, and I don't have to go into a big studio if I don't have to. And this is just, it was liberating to me, literally liberating. So when I took the master tracks back to the studio, I had the engineer, and you'll know who the engineer is, but I won't mention his name tonight.
Okay.
And he flew in the tracks, the new ones. And luckily, the rhythm section was paid and gone, so they weren't able to hear it. But the engineer, he went, "This doesn't sound like what we recorded yesterday." I said, "Oh, I did a little work on it over the weekend." And so
Yeah.
I actually brought in another engineer who had worked with Bryan Adams in Little Mountain and was, pretty much a ringer. And we finished the song, and it was fantastic. And it was so thrilling that I learned how to do this remote recording, and I said, this is the future. This is where things are going, because people like me, we want to not spend our entire family fortune on going into big studios and spending everything that our family money on recording stuff when we don't have to.
Right.
Love to go into big studios to A, do beds, B, do mixing, but all the rest of the stuff we can kind of do in our home studios now.
Yeah.
And so no dits to big studios. We love big studios, and if we could afford to be in a big studio all day long, we would.
Yeah.
But there's something about having this opportunity to record remotely, which is super liberating to me. So my last record that I did, everything was done remotely except for a lot of the early bed tracks, which I did out in Abbotsford at Soren's studio down under. Shout out to Soren, and great musicians like Darren Servard and Phil Robertson and Jerry Adolph and Dennis Marchenko and John Ellis, and just all the guys that did such a great job. And now we're doing everything kind of remotely, which is through Sessionwire, makes it so much easier. So that was kind of the story of how I discovered remote recording. And when I heard about Sessionwire, the first thing I did was I ended up becoming the entertainment at their first debut sort of party that they had for investors. And they said, "Can you invite Randy Bachman?" So Randy Bachman and myself did a duo. We did These Eyes and She's Come Undone and a few other songs in the Armory studio as a private thing. Tal Bachman was there as well. And we did this, and it was really exciting to be part of this, the birth of Sessionwire. Randy became an investor, and later I became an investor, and we had started to follow the company for a while. And it just happened over time that I said, I think I had a public company. I was the CEO and president of a public company, and then I hired a new CEO, and I became the chairman, and then I decided to exit that company. And I thought, what am I going to do now? I said, well, I've got some experience here. I'm going to go in and help with Sessionwire and see if we can, really start to build this thing up, because I'm excited about the future. And this is before Zoom, and this is before the whole COVID thing. And that's how that started.
It's incredible. I mean, I feel like everybody that's involved in Sessionwire has a similarly interesting story of how they have kind of been pulled into the Sessionwire vortex and how we're all so excited about it. It's interesting to hear yours, though. I want to go back, though, and talk a little bit about Little Mountain Sound, because that's a name that keeps coming up all the time, and I don't think that there are... I mean, maybe a lot of people of a certain age have heard of Little Mountain Sound and what went on there, but for people maybe like my age and younger, I had no idea Little Mountain Sound was what it was, and it still is. It's not Little Mountain Sound anymore. It's called...
it's Hipposonic now.
Hipposonic, yeah. So...
Which I went to and mixed my last record. I did about 6 songs that I mixed there.
Okay.
Just it was like being in the old room again, right?
Yeah, I've seen photos and I've heard some of the stories, but I wondered, if we could just briefly kind of get into what went down there while you were hanging out all the
Well,
time.
we have to keep it PG, Brendan.
I know.
I'll tell you one story that stuck in my head, and I think this is important for the listeners because there's a moral behind it, kind of a story. And I remember it was a hot summer afternoon. It was the middle of the afternoon, and I think Richie Zamboro was doing some guitar tracks, and I think in the Paul Jantz room somebody was doing some overdubs. And I was sitting on the black couch. There was like, the dust particles in the air from the sun coming in through the window. And it's just me and John Bon Jovi. And as I'm sitting there, I said to John, I says, when you finish recording this record, what are you guys going to do? Like, what's the plan? And he looked at me in all seriousness and he said, Colin, we are going to be the #1 rock band in America. I went, oh, okay. Now, I kind of grew up around Little Mountain Sound, and I've seen these hair bands come and go, and some of them never had a hit. They would come in there with stars in their eyes, record something, and then go absolutely nowhere. So the doubt inside of me is like, oh yeah, who does this guy think he is? #1 band in America. Yeah, right. And but he was dead serious. So fast forward a year later, they had recorded Slippery When Wet. It sold over 7 million records. And I got a call from Laird Doyle, who was one of the assistants at Little Mountain. And he said, Colin, the Bon Jovi guys are coming back to town. They're going to record their next record. They said they want to see you. We're going out to the airport. You want to come? I said, yeah, sure. Of course I want to come. So we went out in one of those, those hotel shuttle kind of buses. And we drove out to the airport. And the guys came out of the airport, and we're walking on. And John sees me sitting in like one of the first seats, and he says, "Hey, Colin!" And he reaches into his satchel and he pulls out a Rolling Stone magazine, and he throws it on my lap. And on the cover it says, "Bon Jovi, #1 rock band in America."
Unreal.
True story.
So why do you think they, out of all the hair bands that went through after, Middle Mountain Sound, why were they successful, in your opinion?
Well, the #1 thing, the moral to that story is belief.
Yeah.
They believed in themselves. But I mean, John was a handsome guy, and they were a great band, and they wrote some good songs, and they had Bob Rock, they had Little Mountain, they had a really great team behind them. So there was a lot of things that worked in their favor. But I think the point I was trying to make, it's really not about the music or about the person. It was really about the belief.
Right.
And it was like burning the ships. It's like there's no going back. This is what we're doing. We're going to be the #1 rock band in America, and they did it. Not only once, but it continued after that. So that always stuck with me. And we see little glimpses of brilliance throughout our careers where we find these, I would say, stories that resonate with us. I can give you a real quick one about Randy Bachman.
Yeah.
We were playing in a classic rock tour with Blue Oyster Cult and 38 Special, and I forget who the other two bands were, but we were we had a day off in Minnesota, and we were in one of those Holiday Inn bubble kind of hotels and motels. I don't know if you've seen one of those. They've got like the pitch and putt in the middle of the hotel.
I've never seen. No.
Somebody out there in the chat say, yeah, I've been to one of those Holiday Inns.
Okay.
It's snowing outside. It's like way below zero, but you're in this kind of geodesic bubble dome, and it's kind of got waterfalls going through it, and all the rooms kind of face in.
Oh, I know what you're okay.
Yeah, so we're in one of these motels or these hotels, and it's a day off, and it's probably around 2:00 in the afternoon. I hear this knock on my hotel room door, and it's Randy. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Got a day off, not doing anything, can't go outside. It's like a whiteout."
Right.
And he says, "Can you help me?" I said, "Sure, what's up?" And he brings in this garbage bag, and he dumps it out onto the second bed in my hotel room, and it's all cassette tapes. And he's got all these envelopes, and he says, "I want you to lick these he's all printed out all these addresses and put the address on the envelope and then put these cassette tapes in these demos and wrap a rubber band around them and sending them off in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's sending out demos. And so as we're going, all these different publishers and so on and so forth. And then I see one, and it said Brian Setzer. Now, I'm a big Brian Setzer fan. I love the Stray Cats. And I'm thinking to myself, what's Randy sending to Brian Setzer?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what song is this? He says, oh, it's my song, Can't Go Back to Memphis. And I thought, oh, I've heard that song. It's like an upside down, shaken all over. And I thought, that's kind of odd because Brian Setzer writes his own songs. I mean, he writes great songs. And plus, there's so many songs from the 50s and early 60s that could be covered by Brian Setzer. Guy would never run out of material. Why on earth would he record this song? That's what was going through my mind.
Okay.
Fast forward a few months later, we're touring in Florida, and we stop for lunch, and we're at this restaurant, and below the restaurant is a Sam Goody record store. This is back when they actually sold records in a retail store, and CDs as well. It's not that long ago.
Right.
And so I'm sitting on the tour bus. We just finished lunch, and Randy comes walking onto the tour bus, and he sees me sitting there, and he throws the CD at me. He says, Colin, check it out. Turn it over. I said, what is this? He said, turn it over. So I look at it, and it's a brand new Stray Cats record called Choo Choo Hot Fish. I turn it over, and there's a track, Can't Go Back to Memphis, Randy Bachman. Suddenly, I had this epiphany. I had this immediate sense that, my doubt was like, I couldn't believe it. I just went, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same like the Bon Jovi story. It was the tenacity, it was the work ethic, it was the persistence, it was the belief.
Right.
And so for all of you guys and musicians out there that are watching this, it's not about the tools, it's not about Sessionwire, it's not about the plugins, it's about you. It's about your persistence. It's about your creativity. It's about your authenticity. And when you can do that and get it to the people, like he did, he was, he addressed a lot of envelopes that day and he got a cut. And that's the way it works.
That's a good way to look at things. I never thought of it that way. There are particular moments in my life now that I can kind of reflect back on and kind of go, oh, that worked out because I just did it. I knew it was going to happen and, threw it out into the ether. And yeah, the belief is important. I wonder, I had a question related to something in there, but it floated away. I wondered, actually, we're talking about your music career and, through Randy Bachman and now in the Sessionwire, and you're working on a new project. I wondered if we could kind of go into what you're working on musically now, your solo record. Are you doing any, session work? Are you playing, does Randy call you every now and again? And
no, I don't actually do session work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a singer-songwriter, so I'm actually just, writing a new album. And my record that I released last year just came up against the whole COVID thing, and I couldn't get out there and promote it. So I've got a garage full of CDs, and most people don't even have CD players anymore. But you can find me. You can find me on Spotify, and the record is called Front Row Seat, and that song I wrote with Randy. We co-wrote that one together, and it's a really fun song. With a true story behind it. But that whole album I'm really super proud of and did a lot of it remotely. So that's kind of my latest project. Mm-hmm. And I think the next project that I do is probably going to be a little bit more, I think, on the mellow side, up close and alone type of thing.
Okay.
I've been doing a lot of those types of shows recently where it's just me and a piano singing to an audience, and they seem to really like that kind of especially at our age, right? It's a little different. So I might go that way for the next record, but I'm also thrilled with some of the new talent that I've been meeting through Sessionwire and the collaborations that could happen. So I don't know. It's wide open.
That was a related question I had, was what are you most excited about in regards to remote collaboration?
Well, that's it. It's just meeting new people with new talent and seeing what can be created. That's, the sum of something is better than just the same. A lot of us have been working in isolation, not just through this past year, but even before that.
Right.
It's like we work alone in our home studios and we ask ourselves, we second guess all the time, is that good? Or should I go to the major, to the minor? It's like, I don't really know. It's like they both sound good, but, and then you ask your wife or somebody close to you, what do you think? Oh, they both sound good to me. It's like you need to be in the room with somebody that challenges you and says, hey, why don't you try that? Oh,
Right.
that's weird. And that's kind of where magic happens. Sometimes there's just like happy accidents where you just, might have played a wrong chord or you did something and someone will go, wow, that's cool. Or you sing a lyric and it just happens to be the lyric that is the key to the whole song. It's the hook.
Right. Yeah, we talk about that all the time when using Sessionwire. That's what it's for, is catching those moments, those real live moments when you can't be in the same room as another person, that feedback that you need. I wondered if we could talk a little bit about your role as CEO with Sessionwire and how you're shaping this company from a business, not, a business perspective. We don't have to really get into business, but I think that, I think it's interesting to discuss kind of how you're steering this software development ship in a world like the music industry that's constantly changing.
Well, I think it's culture based. And I think what we have to do is it's product-led growth. And what's been really important to me right from the beginning is to make sure that it's very simple for people to use and that people can get a result from it. And in most technology that you use today, it's once you start to get into something and you use it, I started using Photoshop in 1988 when it first shipped.
Right.
Actually, Adobe Illustrator used to be called Adobe 88 because it came out in 1988. And it was on a floppy disk.
Right.
1 megabyte floppy disk, if you can believe it. But you see, when something gets into your workflow and you want to make it superfluous, right? You just want it to disappear so you can create.
Right.
And I think that's one of the main things with Sessionwire that we wanted to do is it's got to be for Mac, it's got to be for Windows, it's got to be right in your DAW, it's got to be able to commute with somebody or communicate with somebody in a second, and you got to get to be able to work and create without having to worry about, all the technology stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Right.
And so before, as you know, it was a little bit hard to use, and technology is always changing. Internet's changing, bandwidth is changing, phones are changing, but we're not changing. We still want to make music and we want to make it easy. So I think, part of that is the culture and the ease of use and making it accessible so that people use it.
Right. Perfect. Sorry, I'm just dealing with something on our...
You got some questions coming in?
We do have questions, yeah. One of the questions is, how many records have you worked on that would have been done differently had Sessionwire existed then?
Whoa, that's a good question, because probably a whole lot more. Because I had friends in Toronto that I would have really liked to work with, but just wasn't going to buck up for a plane ticket.
Right.
So I think, and studios have changed too. I mean, the type of interfaces that we have now and what we're able to record just on our laptops is far ahead of what we had back then when we were using Porta Studios, cassette tape players, these types of things. So I think we probably would have done a lot more stuff had we had something like Sessionwire.
Interesting. Another semi-related question, I guess. How do people... Chris Nunn says, it's hard to find people that want to collaborate rather than recruit you for their purpose for free. I don't mind helping if that is the understanding purpose for working together. Right. Yeah. So just in terms of finding people to work with collaboratively instead of hiring them, is that what you're saying, Chris? I think I understand what you're saying. That, the whole community aspect of Sessionwire, it's being built at the moment. It's still in kind of a rudimentary phase, but the whole purpose of the community tab of Sessionwire is for you to be able to find people to collaborate with and reach out to them, through a chat, hey, can we collaborate on this project? And you connect via video, and before you know it, you're in a session writing and producing and recording.
Well, that's a really good question, and I think that just comes back to real life. And it's got nothing to do with Sessionwire or the community. It's like if you're at a bar and you're talking to somebody and they go, hey, do you want to jam tomorrow? It's like, okay, do I want to? What kind of music do you like? Oh, I like this. And it's like, is there something that we have in common? Oh yeah, I really like this band. And oh yeah, I do too. And the next thing you know, you have this camaraderie that says, yeah, let's make some music together. And you go from there.
Right.
Whereas if you are, a singer-songwriter like me and you want to hire a bass player, I mean, I just want to hire a guy to just play the bass part. I already know what it is. I've already written the chords. I don't really need any creative inspiration that way. I just want to hire a session musician. And there's lots of great companies out there like Sound Better or Air Gigs and things like that where you can actually find musicians for hire that you can get to work on your song. But when I think, was his name Chris?
Chris, yeah.
Yeah. I think what Chris is referring to is how do I get to collaborate with other people and, express myself with them. And I think that's just reaching out, whether it's on Sessionwire or other social media channels or the good old fashioned phone, and say, hey, what are you into? And it's just like real life.
Yeah. So essentially,
make a distinction there. It's not all about hiring session musicians and that kind of thing. It is about collaboration, but that's something you have to work the room,
Well, exactly. And speaking of rooms, there are lots of Facebook groups and pages that you can kind of dive into. People looking, I know for instance, there's one, I think it's Canada wide, it's people wanting to record cover videos together, and somebody posts, hey, I want to do this cover, and people just comment, hey, I'll do it with you. I'll do that with you. There are lots of groups like that for songwriting and production, and different DAWs have different Facebook groups that you can join and have conversations with people. And it is exactly just starting a conversation somewhere. Cool. Yeah. Another question. This is for all the gear nerds out there. What are some of the most inspiring pieces of music gear that you've encountered over the years? You mentioned an ARP. That's
well, I'll tell you my number
serious.
One story is I borrowed some money off my mom in the 80s and bought a Jupiter 8. And I paid $5,700 for that keyboard. And it was the cool keyboard to have in the 80s band that I was in at the time. And I sacrificed a lot. So my setup in the 80s was a Yamaha CP80 electric grand and a Jupiter 8 on top. And that was my rig. And fast forward, when MIDI came out, my Jupiter 8 didn't have MIDI. And when I was in the Paul Jantz band, I didn't use the Jupiter 8. I used because we connected everything with MIDI cables. And so I decided to trade it in. And I traded it in on an Atari ST computer. And the kind that you see in the landfills now.
Yeah.
And now the Jupiter 8s are well over 10 grand US if you can find one. So that was a sad moment. That was like getting rid of a 59 Strat, if you know what I mean.
Oh, goodness.
I still have the electric grand, though.
Do you?
Yeah, it was played by Commander Cody by Jerry Lee Lewis. It is the sound on the Bon Jovi Slippery When Wet record because I rented my electric grand at the studio.
Wow.
It was on a number of albums recorded at Little Mountain. It went on tour with Jimmy Barnes in Australia, with Loverboy, with a whole bunch. So I still have that and a lot of them signed the bottom of my electrogram, but you can't see it anymore. Little Richard and just a lot of different artists, but I still have that. And if I can ever find my Jupiter 8, I may just have to get that, like, old guys collect their old cars, their favorite,
Yeah.
car that they had when they were 16 or 17, and when they turn 60, they go, I got to have my old car back. I might have that, moment where I say, I got to have my Jupiter 8 back.
Do you remember who you sold it to?
I traded it at Long McQuaid.
Traded it, right, for the Atari.
Yeah, and the guy from Long McQuaid actually is the head guy at Roland, Paul McCabe.
Oh, wow. But he probably has no idea where that thing ended up, so.
No.
Could be at the National Music Center in Calgary in their keyboard collection.
It could be. It could very well be.
That's one of my kind of goals with Sessionwire, is to get them hooked up so people can play Tonto via Sessionwire.
Wow.
That would be that'd be very exciting. But that's it's down the road. Check to see if there are any more questions here.
Yeah, we're up at about an hour now, so might be good to take a question or two and then
maybe wrap it up shortly here.
Wrap it up for the night.
Yeah. Do you have another a podcast that you're on? Do you want to talk about that really quick? I feel like people should know about that.
Yeah, every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. It's called Star Talk Podcast, and it's sponsored by Starwire. That's another company that specializes in blockchain technology, and we're creating some NFTs. There's another partner of mine that's behind the scenes that works on that. So I do Sessionwire and he does Starwire. One day those two companies might end up coming together in some way, but the Starwire token is a governance token, and it allows what's called fractional ownership of movies and music. So if you go to starwire.io, you can check that out and be happy to talk about that at another time. But yeah, Star Talk is fun. I'm on there with Marty Kramer. He was a tour manager with the Rolling Stones, with Ringo Starr, with Bachman Turner, and with Burton Cummings for 27 years. And most of the whole time I was with Randy. Marty was our tour manager. So we go back away and we have a lot of road stories. So it's a light show, and we started a show called Let's Talk Rock. And we ended up talking to film people and whatnot, so we just call it Star Talk now, for lack of a better name. And we have a lot of fun interviewing some very cool people. So that's you can find that on YouTube, Tuesday nights at 7.
Awesome. 7 PDT, I guess it would be now.
Yes, Pacific time.
Yeah. Quick, kind of left turn into cryptocurrencies. How did you get into cryptocurrency, and what's the genesis of that path?
The public company that I was with and was a founder of a company called Imagination Park Entertainment, traded on the CSE under the letters IP. When we were an entertainment company, before we went into virtual reality, one of the things I noticed was that there was a real discrepancy. We had a film that was on Netflix. We had some films that distributors around the world were picking up, and we had a production that was going on overseas, and we needed to get them some money. And because we're in Canada, we couldn't just wire the money there. Our CFO had to literally cross the U.S. border, go to a bank, do a wire transfer over to Spain. They needed to cash the money there, change it into their local currency in order to pay crew over there, and that took time, and they're always on the clock.
Right.
So we're continually having to do this, and I thought to myself, when I first heard of blockchain and Bitcoin and how you could actually, instantly send money through a token, I thought, this is going to change the world. This is the way of the future. And everybody thought I was crazy. They thought, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, I can see this future that someday we'll be able to just have a thumb drive and be able to send somebody in Spain some money just like that. They can take that token and change it to whatever fiat currency they want, without having to go through all of this central bank nonsense. So that was the genesis of the idea. And we were going to vend it into that public company, but we ended up going into the VR space, augmented reality, which they still are. It's now called Imagine AR.
Okay.
But I did a spin-off called Matrix Blockchain, and we started Starwire, the project, specifically to empower musicians and film producers and whatnot to be able to bake their IP directly into their asset. So when money moves, you get paid. That's our catchphrase. So
interesting.
check out the website and you'll see more. But Sessionwire is definitely what I'm focused on right now. And I think we're at a really great place in not only the company's history, but in the musical. I think the musical creativity of the world is coming together in a way that we haven't seen it yet. And I think we're going to be on the cusp of that.
Amazing. That's a related question. We got 3 questions so far that we're going to get to, but related question, how do you see blockchain intersecting with the music streaming space?
Yeah, well, it already is. And what I see happening is that, the metadata that we create at the time of creation, I'll just use a simple analogy. Brendan and I write a song and we say it's 50-50. It's like the Nashville rules. If you're in the room, you're in the song. And so we say, okay, well, how do we do that? Okay, well, we can go through our SOCAN, our performance rights, our BMI, our ASCAP, or whatever. We can write out the papers. We can, put the demo in the mailbox and mail it to ourselves. We can do all that sort of stuff. What the Starwire application does is we create what's called a smart contract. And the smart contract, it's just to use an analogy, if you were to build a website, hand coding it and knowing HTML, you'd have to be a coder to do that. But if you use something like WordPress or a website builder, you don't have to be a coder. You can just use that tool to create the website. Well, it's the same what we're doing now with smart contracts. You don't need to know how to code Solidity or anything like that. You just need to understand that, oh, you're 50, I'm 50, here's where the payouts exist, and we create a smart contract and render it to the blockchain. Now we have that statement of proof of who actually wrote that song and any monies that come in, where they will be directed. So if we have a publishing deal or a distribution deal, that gets put into a contract which gets amended to that. And it's all done real easy and simply just through an application. So the blockchain's happening right now. And when you mention streaming, that's the whole big Pollyanna goal, is that, when someone buys something, whether it's a movie or a song, it immediately pays everybody that's involved. It doesn't go to a central registry. It's like Brendan's got money in his pocket.
Amazing.
Right now.
Don't have to wait for a check in the mail.
Nope.
2 more questions. Let me see here. If you could connect with anyone to work on your record with, who would it be? Anyone in the world?
Wow, that's a good question. Wow. Maybe J.R. Robinson.
It's totally doable now.
Yeah.
With the power of Sessionwire. Actually, a little teaser, I think that we're probably going to work with JR again at some point and do another video with him, showing his workflow with Sessionwire in a little bit more depth. So for all the watchers, the viewers out there, there's going to be more content from him coming, which is very exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. If I thought of big producers and whatnot, I could name a few. But that's a really good question, and I think it gives me pause to really sit down and maybe in my journal one day kind of go through of like, who would I really want to work with? Like, if the world was open, would it be Rick Rubin? Would it be some of these amazing singers? Would it be some of these Jacob Colliers or guys like that? I mean, who would I really want to work with? And I think everybody out there that's listening to this should maybe make their own top 10 list, because it is possible.
Absolutely, it is. Going back to the whole belief theory, like just a small example. I it's on hiatus, but I have a podcast that is actually broadcast live that was called Friday Drum Hang. And I'd had local drummers up until one night, had a couple of, pops on the couch, and I got up the courage and sent a Facebook message to David Garibaldi.
Wow.
And he said yes immediately. He wanted to be on the thing, so sat down and spoke with David. So it's everybody's within reach, and particularly with Sessionwire in terms of recording, you could have anybody play on your record from anywhere in the world for not a lot of money. No flights, no hotels.
Well, and especially if you got a good song. I mean, people that hear a good song, they want to be on it.
Yes.
And they want to support you. And so I just encourage anybody out there, whether they join Taxi or whether they go to some of the freelance sites that are out there, is just to do your thing, make some music, and people will, people will gather around you and support you if it's something that they feel part of. And people polarize. I mean, there's some people that like this kind of music and other people that like this kind of music. It's up to you to find your tribe and the people that you want to make music with. And Sessionwire is a way to do it.
Exactly.
Anyway, thanks for having me on, Brendan. Really had a great time tonight. And if there's not any more questions, it's been fun.
Yeah, there's two more, but if you have to run, I can answer them while you leave.
Sure, a couple quick questions.
So Michael asks, it's just about the Atari computer. You mentioned Atari computers, which used to run Notator MIDI software ahead of its time. Did you use that?
Yes. I used to make sort of computer, sort of new agey kind of music, just because I liked ambient music with no vocals. I'm an artist, so I paint and I draw, and couldn't really find anything out there at the time. And a guy gave me this cassette tape at a school one time, and it was this ambient kind of, you would call it spa music or new age music now, but at the time I'd never heard anything like it. I thought, wow, this is really, really cool for, when I'm painting or drawing and stuff like that. So I was making my own.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Incredible. Last question from Chris, and then we'll wrap up. Have you pitched this to any university or recording schools? I think Full Sail could use this as they have online classes. It would have been useful when I went through their audio production program.
Yeah, currently I think they're being, Sessionwire is being looked at by Juilliard, by Berkeley, by a lot of different educational outfits out there.
We've got a lot of irons in the fire, so to speak. Great moment to wrap up. Thanks, Colin, for joining me. Next broadcast, I'll be joined by Ross Gillard, our biz dev genius. We're going to talk about his background in music and what he does for Sessionwire and whatever else we get into answering your questions. So thanks again, Colin.
Great job, Brendan. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the people that are listening. And if you're joining us on YouTube after the fact, try Sessionwire out. You can get a free account. It's called the Creator account, and it's pretty valuable just as it is, without any money, without any credit card. And if you want to upgrade to the fancy plugins and stuff, there's a way to do that too. But join the community and get in there and make some cool music.
Absolutely, and feel free to reach out to us at support@sessionwire.com if you have any questions. We're happy to answer and happy to help get you set up. Thanks again, Colin.
Thanks, Brendan.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.